Good evening, and welcome to Grimm's Ghost Stories. Tonight's story is My First Day on the Job at a Substation in Texas Was Nothing Short of Terrifying, Part 2, written by Wayne Cummins. I got ready for my second shift at Electronic Solutions of Texas and couldn't help but feel an anxious air crawl over me. The drive out to the concrete square in the desert was another long and haunting one. Summer nights in Texas are beautiful and unforgiving. The stars numbered beyond comprehension, and you could trace the edge of the Milky Way like a raging river across the black blue sky. But the humid air was thick, like just stepping out of a scalding hot shower that went on for too long. There was a layer of fog that sat lazily on the air, content with not moving an inch. My AC was broken in my truck, so I drove with the windows down and my head half out, trying to keep a breeze through my hair. I cranked up Jimmy's Wind Cries Mary to actually hear it over the wind, and smirked when I caught on to the irony of it. I got there, and my Chevy was the only vehicle. No Bronco, meaning no Walter. I suppose he figured I could handle it on my own. I was at once proud and pissed at the same time. Both of those dissolved quickly into plain worried. I had a ton of questions for Walter about the night before, and now there were going to be no answers. I walked inside, and it was cold to the point of sanctifying. The tiny concrete block had central air. Right then, I didn't mind the absurdity of it. I just enjoyed the cold air. I headed for the table in the break room, but stopped at the reception window when I noticed something off. The old touch-tone phone sitting on the reception counter/window frame had a single blinking red light. The phone had a thick plastic shell and was a dull beige color that had crusty gunk and age-old stains all over. I pressed the blinking red button and Walter's voice played on the machine. "Hey, Billy. Sorry I can't make it out tonight. You're on your own, big fella. I'm confident you can hack it." Walter chuckled, his voice echoing mechanically from the answering machine. "As far as the power acting all willy-nilly, it'll do that. The cold you were experiencing is to be expected as well. Just a side effect from all the electrical equipment." "My ass," I muttered to myself. Walter was feeding me bullshit, or blowing me off. Neither made me happy, but the idea it might be the former worried me. "You just keep up the good work and make sure you make that endless walk on time. And remember, no more than 25 minutes down there," Walter said, in a tone as if he was reminding a child not to put his hand over the stove again. I was beginning to dislike Walter. "All right, then. You have a protective night there, Feather." There was a childlike giggle that snuck out of Walter right at the end there, then a click, and that was it. I felt like I had been let down a little, but I've had plenty of employers with that hands-off approach, so it wasn't a huge letdown. I went to the security room and heard the old leather squeak as I sat down in the ancient office chair. I looked over the monitors and saw about what I expected. A whole lot of nothing. Every room, every flat expanse of land, and every angle of the infinite tunnel was still and quiet. I leaned back in my seat, put my headphones in, and continued listening to Jimmy's All Along the Watchtower. The sun set, and 10 o'clock came by sooner than I expected. I grabbed my light and clipboard and headed down in the narrow elevator. Thankfully, no power outage while heading down this time. I was dreading it like a kid who did something wrong and was waiting for their father to get home. Luckily, the darkness stayed away and the metal door slid open to reveal a lit tunnel. Not well lit, but that seemed to be the norm. I made most of my walk without any intensely cold gusts of wind or sections of tunnel suddenly turning into shadow. I jogged from meter to meter, making my time down there a little shorter and getting in a bit of exercise while I was at it. I told myself it had nothing to do with the creepy experiences I'd already had down there. No, not at all. I got to the last meter on my route and quickly jotted down the levels. I decided to stroll back instead of jog. I still had about 15 minutes left out of my 25, so I decided to take my time. Before I got very far from the last meter, I heard a quick shuffling of feet behind me. It startled the shit out of me. Not literally, thank Christ. And I spun around so fast it almost made me dizzy. There was nothing but tunnel, of course. But I could still hear the sound of the footsteps fading into a distant echo deep down the tunnel. Still, I saw absolutely nothing aside from the pipes and wires and the long, infinite tunnel that extended before me. I could feel every hair on the back of my neck standing at attention. I shone my light down the endless walk, angling the beam to light up the dark patches where the shadows took hold. Still nothing. But I noticed it was beginning to get exceptionally cold. I peered down the tunnel, frozen in my boots from both the fear and cold. That's when I saw movement. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but it moved slowly and without pause. Then I got closer, and I can see it was fog. A thick layer of icy white fog that covered the bottom of the tunnel and attempted to crawl up the sides as it advanced towards me. I took a quick step back and felt a moist coldness creep up the back of my ankle and slither around my calves. I looked down, and the fog had moved in from the other end. I had no idea how it could have snuck up on me like that. I'd glanced behind me plenty of times during my jog, and not once did I see an encroaching 2 feet tall carpet of fog. I was genuinely freaked out at this point. I had just turned back towards the elevator and noticed the fog coming from both sides when I heard it behind me again. That odd, inorganic howl that rested on the wind like a distant nightmare waiting to happen. There was also the metal scratching, a skittering sound that was both light and heavy at the same time, somehow. I didn't turn around, and I was no longer frozen in place. I ran down the tunnel at full speed. The pages of paper flapped on my clipboard and my hair pulled back from my face. I pushed off hard from the rounded floor of the tunnel and could feel the soles of my shoes heat up. My heart felt like it was pumping a gallon of blood with each massive beat. As I neared the section of tunnel with the elevator, I could hear the skittering get louder and bounce off the narrow tunnel walls. It felt like the sound was escaping the tunnel and trying to burrow into my brain through my ears. I made it to the elevator door and latched my hands onto the metal frame to stop my momentum. I pressed the call button and heard the elevator begin to shake and rumble in response. The skittering and scratching was getting louder, and I frantically looked left and right, expecting to catch a glimpse of my doom. All I saw was fog, but the lights were now repeating their behavior from last night and beginning to flicker off one by one in my direction. Jesus fucking Christ, I muttered as I focused back on the elevator panel, mashing its single button repeatedly like my life depended on it. It sure as hell felt like it did. When I heard the bing of the elevator arriving at its destination, the skittering all stopped all at once. Somehow, the sudden lack of noise actually startled me. I jumped and quickly looked both ways. The lights had stopped flickering, but the ones already off did not come back on. Nor did the fog leave or the cold drift away. The atmosphere was still one of paranoia and hesitant fear, but I couldn't help but stop and wonder what the hell was going on. As the door fully opened, I noticed something far down the endless walk. It was as far as my last stop, maybe farther. It was completely dark at that point of the tunnel, save for a single hanging light. It blinked off and on in sporadic little twitches of light as it dangled back and forth. In the spastic light, through hundreds of feet of dark tunnel, I could just barely make out a single object. It was a white figure, glowing dimly. It was way too far to make out any distinct features, but it looked naked and very pale. It was human-shaped, but it didn't really look human. It had long arms and short legs, a hunched-down head and neck, and it was tall enough to be crammed from floor to ceiling and still need more room. I could stand on my toes in the tunnel and still have a foot of headspace at least. It stood there for a moment, motionless and eerie as all fuck. Then it just appeared to fade away. The darkness and the fog just seemed to envelop it, and it was gone. I didn't waste any more time and got in the elevator. The door closed, and I headed back up to the concrete block hundreds of feet above. To my infinite gratitude, the elevator shook the whole way, but did not falter on its way up. When I got to the top, I was in too much of a rush to wait for the door to fully open. I shoved through the gap as soon as I had the room and rushed to the TV monitors. I was instantly disappointed and concerned when I saw a boring, normal, well-lit, and fog-free tunnel. The endless walk looked as it had when I first saw it, just a maddeningly long chamber of wires and pipes. I was angry, and I hate to admit, but a little relieved too. I even stopped the recording on the old VCRs, rewound the tapes, and played them back. As I did, I had a quick side thought about how outdated this place really was. It made me wonder how secure our power grid was when this was how we maintained it. I watched myself arrive at the end of the route, and just as I seemed to notice a sudden cold, all 4 screens that monitored the walk went fuzzy. Oh, fuck you, that's not fair. I fast-forwarded a little. More snow. I fast-forwarded more. Still fuzzy. Finally, the snow cleared up and the elevator door slid shut, and I caught a quick glimpse of my wide-eyed and heavy-breathing self. Well, of fucking course, I thought. That whole length of footage was completely useless. It did, however, raise the curiosity of why the hell the videos just so happened to fuck up while filming my encounter with the cold. I was frustrated, freaked out, and confused. So my logical solution was to go out to my truck and grab a spliff. When I stepped outside, the humidity was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, but not freezing, still air. The fog was still there, and that immediately struck me as odd, but I was more concerned with the events that had happened 200 feet below the ground. I'm honestly guessing about the depth. I still don't know how deep it really is. I reached in the open passenger window, opened the glove box, pushed aside my hand cannon, found what I was fumbling for, and pulled out the whole pack. I own a cool little rolling machine I bought at a humidor years back. I'll make a couple dozen spliffs at a time, then fill up a cigarette pack, and no one's the wiser. I lit my first one and sent a glance to one of the security cameras on the building. I wondered if Walter ever watched the footage. He didn't really seem like the type to give a shit. After 3 spliffs, I was feeling much more balanced. I headed back inside into the security room. As I passed Shirley sprawled out on her Firebird, I finally looked at the date of the calendar. July 1976. Sounded about right. I got back to the monitors and all was well. I sat in the chair, leaned back, and went back to my tunes. I was beginning to convince myself that I simply worked for a very old and odd electric company that was just a little outdated. And with outdated companies comes faulty and dangerous work environments. I was no stranger to that kind of workplace. Hell, it's what I thrive in. I was sure I had just been spooked and was seeing things. Yeah, that all made perfect sense. I did my best to relax and started in on Born Under a Bad Sign while I kept an eye on the screens. It was 1:18 and I was right in the best part of Zepp's brawny air stomp when I saw the lights flicker and shut off in the reception room. I pulled the headphones from my ears and leaned forward in the leather office chair. It creaked and squeaked with every inch I moved. I tapped the glass tube and a single line of white feedback scrolled horizontally across the screen. I sighed, grabbed the flashlight, and stood up. I headed for the door to the break room when I glanced back at the screen one more time. I was hoping to see the light back on so I could just sit back down and start enjoying my music again. The screen was still dark, but the light did flicker back on. Just for a millisecond, and not very brightly, but I could see the 2 chairs in the reception room for the briefest of moments. In one of the chairs sat something. It was so fast I couldn't really tell what it looked like, but I know it was white. A pale, white figure. And it was big. The light flickered for a millisecond again, and it wasn't there. I instantly did not want to go out there. But I took a breath and remembered how much THC was in my system. You're cool, you're okay, I thought, and headed for the reception room. I looked at the closed reception window as I headed through the break room. The window was that bumpy kind of glass that's impossible to discern anything through. All I could tell was that it was dark out there. I shone my light at the window and heard a quick shuffling sound. It sounded like one of the chairs scraped across the floor just an inch or 2. I froze in my tracks, and every muscle in my body tensed. Then I had a crazy idea and rushed for the door. I swung it open and pointed the flashlight at the darkness. I had no intention or forethought of growling, but that's exactly what I did. I growled like a fucking tiger, baring my teeth and everything. If I wasn't so full of adrenaline, I would have felt like an idiot. I scanned the entire room and all 16 square feet of it. There was nothing. Just that same disgusting tile and 2 ugly metal chairs. One of them was a few inches away from the wall, though. I shone my light upward and saw the black burn mark on the inside of the bulb in the ceiling. I headed outside and around the tiny concrete compound. I unclipped the small bundle of keys from my belt and found the key for the fenced-off area. The desert was colder now, just bordering on freezing. It was the middle of fucking July and my skin was starting to go all goose flesh. The fog curled and sat in a thick mattress as far as I could see. The whole desert was drowned out in a white, frosty mist, and it gave off a soft halo in the light of the waxing moon. I felt like I wasn't on Earth anymore. For the first time in a while, I thought I might have smoked a little too much for the situation at hand. I unlocked the gate and passed by the humming transformers and breakers. They emitted a bit of warmth, and I passed a little closer than I probably should have. I got to the rectangular 4x6-foot square storehouse in the corner of the fenced-off area. It looked more like an outhouse. It was handmade from thick mesquite planks and was half covered in chipping white paint. The door had an old engraved handle and brass lock pad. I flipped through the short ring of keys Walter had given me on day 1. There was a classic, ancient-looking dirty bronze key on the ring. It had only 2 square teeth and storage, S-T-O-R-I-J, etched poorly into the side. I turned the key in the lock and the metal answered with a heavy click and thud. I opened the door and shined my light in. There were cardboard boxes of every size, stacked in no particular order. Each box had a list of contents scrolled on the front of the box in chicken scratch posing for human handwriting. The first few I could actually make out were wires, nails, bolts, screws, etc., and light bulbs, paper clips, paper. I reached for the latter and opened it up. I grabbed 2 light bulbs, remembering the security room's complete lack of one. I was about to put the box back when I noticed the one beneath had VHS written poorly on the lid. I shone my light on it and saw 98 to 02 next to the VHS part. I half lifted the lid and the box was completely filled with old VHS cassette tapes. I replaced the lid and slid the box over to reveal the one under. The next box read VHS 83 to 85 plus files. The box held tapes and stacks of old printer paper. I shone the light around the stacks of dozens and dozens of boxes. I scanned the different crop written on each one. I saw 75, 69, 67. One of the oldest boxes looked like it had a tiny 44 in the corner. I had no idea how long Electric Solutions of Texas had been in operation, but it looked like a long damn time. I would have snooped longer, but the temperature felt like it was dropping even lower, and I was the idiot in a short-sleeve button-up and wife beater. I grabbed the light bulbs and quickly headed back into the concrete box. I pulled one of the ugly metal chairs to the center of the floor and stepped up onto the 2 thin arms to reach the light fixture. I held the spare bulb in my mouth while just reaching high enough to slowly spin the other bulb in. I had to extend my body straight up and turn the bulb with my fingertips. Right when I secured the bulb in place and the light shone in my eyes, I heard the loud and familiar bing of the elevator arriving at the top floor. It startled me so bad I lost my balance and nearly fell off the chair. I just managed to catch myself, but the extra bulb flew out of my lips and shattered on the tick gray tile floor. I didn't care. All I could think about was the elevator. I ran through the break room into the security room. I held my big, heavy mag light tight in my hand, weighing its ability as a weapon and feeling so-so about the idea. I began to sweat bullets as I watched the elevator door slowly slide open. The light inside flickered just for a second, but there was nothing there. I stared for a while at the empty elevator, then turned to the TVs, going row by row from the top. The desert was still covered in fog and shining white, but nothing else out of the ordinary. Every room in the concrete box was well and good, and I saw myself staring at the wall monitors. And the third row of tubes, the row that displayed the endless walk, was completely black save for the flecks of reception snow. I'd never been so fucking horrified by blank TV screens. Then I looked down a little further to the control board and saw the big red digital clock. 2:58 a.m. It was time for my second walk. I slowly turned back to the open elevator, and as if sensing my amassing fear, the lights flickered for a split second again. "No fucking thank you," I said out loud. I cautiously leaned into the elevator just enough to see the panel. I pressed the closed door button and quickly pulled back out. The door whined metallically to a close, and I stared at it for probably another full minute. I finally sat down once I accepted the door wasn't going to open again. The TVs were still black, and my gut was in more knots than I wanted to bear. I was glued to those TVs for the next half hour. As much as I waited for any image from the endless walk, I also scanned the other monitors. I began to conjure up all manner of terrifying events to befall me as record-high levels of paranoia overtook me. I continuously leaned back in the old office chair to glance out of the door and into the break room, making sure nothing was sneaking up in the camera blind spots. Half the time I felt like an ass. The other half, I thought about the white figure in the tunnel and feel every nerve in my body go cold and hot at the same time. Before I realized it, I glanced at the digital red clock. 3:27 a.m. I briefly thought about how I'd probably have to bullshit my second check sheet. That's when I heard the unearthly metal howling again. It was coming from outside, and it was loud enough to reach me in the security room. I looked at the row of monitors that displayed the perimeter, and the fog was shifting. The wind must have been kicking up fiercely. Then I noticed something distinct. There was a spout in the mist, shooting up a few feet above the already dense carpet. It reminded me of the water jet skis kick up, and this one was in a torrential ocean of freezing white fog. It was quickly joined by others, and they began to litter every screen. Then they all began to move towards the cameras in my little concrete box in the middle of the desert. "Fuck me," I groaned before the cameras went white and the building began to shake. I ducked down and covered my head instinctively, expecting the whole place to come down on me. The building rumbled, but the place was built solid. Aside from a heavy cloud of dust shaking loose from everything and the bulletin board coming down in the break room, there wasn't any significant damage to the concrete box. I stayed low as I listened to the skittering of what sounded like 1,000 skinny legs scrambling over and around the building. I glanced up at the monitor wall and only saw a swirling haze of white, with the occasional brief shadow flashing past the screen. I thought about how badly I wanted my pistol from the glove box in my Chevy. Not like I'd know what the hell to shoot at, but having a big-ass .357 in your hand is a whole lot of courage on demand. The sound was becoming deafening, and I was just about to the point where I was going to yell from anger and fear. Right about then, the noise suddenly died out, and the rumbling quickly settled. I stood up from a kneel and looked at the monitors. The row on the top was that of a nice and normal desert at 3-something in the morning. The mist and fog was quickly clearing up, and I could make out the ground in a few places. My Chevy was still there, and I was immediately thankful for that. I looked down 2 rows and saw the endless walk, lit as well as ever, and no freezing fog in there either. I was just starting to get ready to be pissed at some higher power that was apparently fucking with me when the little red phone in the security room rang. It looked like the kind of phone you'd see in the 80s and 90s action movies when someone would call the president's secure line. Except this one was cracked in a few places and in dire need of a cleaning. The loud and sudden ringing cut right through me in my state, and I yanked it off the receiver by pure reaction. I held it away from me for a moment, gathering myself and thinking about how I'd answer. "Yellow?" I said as I immediately rolled my eyes. "Billy boy, what the hell happened?" Walter yelled into my ear. I hardly recognized his voice. I couldn't imagine that goofy old bastard angry. Before I could say anything, he went on. "All you have to do is make the 2 rounds down there at 10 and 3 o'clock. It ain't that hard, boy." "How did you—" I began to ask before he cut me off. That ain't what's important. You don't make those rounds and check on them lines. Bad things happen, son. Too many bad things happens, and ain't no amount of hauling ass will put enough miles between you and all kinds of hell, Walter preached. He sounded incredibly convicted to his words. We'll have a talk about this tomorrow night. You be there right at 8:30. You hear me, son? And then he hung up. I was at a loss. Dawn came around soon after my one-sided conversation with Walter, and I finally ventured outside my little concrete fort. As I approached my truck, I felt a hot flush over every inch of my skin. My Chevy looked like it had light hail damage all over the roof and hood, but I knew it wasn't hail that rushed over my old pickup. I didn't hang out to contemplate it. I got in my truck and raced the hell down that road and back to civilization. I don't know what the hell to do. I've got rent and bills to pay, and I'd never find another job quick enough to pay my next set of them. My landlord isn't the type to look kindly on late payments, and I have all kinds of payments I can't fall behind on. But then again, there's no amount of debt that's worth being literally scared to death. All things considered, my plan as of now is to head out tomorrow night, shake Walter's hand, and tell him to go fuck himself. He can find a new hire.